Welcome to this service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County, also known as UUFCC. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Calusa. I am Laura Anderson, the worship associate this morning. My pronouns are she, her. I am a cisgender 66-year-old curvy Caucasian woman. I have long silver and purple streaked hair, and I'm wearing purple wire-rimmed glasses. This morning I'm wearing a lavender sleeveless shirt with a necklace that's glass that has a chalice on it. This service is being streamed live on YouTube this morning. The recording will be available on the UUFCC YouTube channel after the service. I'm obliged to remind you of a few procedures. If you're in the building, please wear a mask and continue to be aware of social distancing. Watching virtually, you might want to have a chalice or candle available if you wish to join in the ritual this morning. Either place, you might check your phone and turn it off. I wish to express gratitude for all who make this service possible. We were all met by a friendly face. Thank you, greeters. Our sanctuary looks beautiful this morning. Thank you, decorators. The chairs are clean, the floor is vacuumed, the bathroom's clean. Thank you, cleaners. Our sound system and our computer system run smoothly. Thank you, techies. We have wonderful music. Thank you, choir. We have an order of service. Thank you, printers and copiers, not the equipment, the people who printed and copied. After the service, we will have a potluck with coffee. Thank you, party makers and baristas. I am humbled this morning by all who support this fellowship in so many ways. I would also like to welcome all of you this morning. Know that you are welcome, your whole self, just as you are. Welcome also to Reverend Murphy, our speaker this morning. Welcome to those of you who have been active here for years, and welcome to those who are new. If you are new and comfortable doing so, would you wave or stand up, tell us your name and where you're from so that we can welcome you?
I'm Penny Lowry, and I come here about twice a year for a very short time. So it's been since April that I've been here, and I love it. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm Bob Murphy's wife and driver.
Welcome.
I'm Linda Poindexter, and I've just relocated here from New Mexico.
Welcome. Thank you.
Oh, I'm Bob Murphy, and my wife's name is Lindell, so Lynn is not Mrs. Murphy, by the way. Don't call her. It's wonderful to be here as your guest speaker. I've been in the ministry about 35 years or something like that. That was the nicest Thanksgiving opening words I've ever heard anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. I hope you find our service meaningful today. The chalice is the sacred symbol of Unitarian Universalists, and Arlen Goff invites us into sacred space, crossing a threshold like this. How will we be renewed in this moment? How will we be changed by this hour? How will we be transformed through this gathering of beloved community? Come, you long, thirsty souls. Bill, would you come forward and light the chalice? The chalice lighting words are in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another. And now Jim will share a prelude.
This piece is called Day by Day. It's arranged by Fred Bach, and I think it's very appropriate for Thanksgiving service.
Thank you, Jim. Our opening words this morning are by Laura Horton Ludwig. For what shall we give thanks? Against a blue sky, a billboard on top of a building says gratitude. The wheel of the year has turned again. Once more the Thanksgiving season has arrived. How shall we sing our song of gratitude now? For what shall we give thanks? For this moment, for friends near and far, for our breath, for love, for courage, and for charity, for strength, for delight, for laughter, for beauty, for the tables round which we gather, for the food we enjoy with friends, seasoned with love and memory, for the sun and moon and stars in the sky, for the trees who have seen so much, and still stand proud, stretching themselves to the sky, for the bright voices of children, for the wisdom of the elders, for actions that bless the world, for hard work that makes a difference, for music and art and celebration and generosity, for compassion and endurance, for joy, for hope. For all these things, we give thanks. Please rise in body or spirit and join the choir in singing hymn number 1008 in the Teal hymnal, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. 1008. We sounded pretty good with that one. We have a long tradition at UUFCC of sharing our joys, sorrows, and life milestones by entering into the Book of Life. These events are sacred, hallowing the living of our days. Messages can be written in the Red Book, which resides at the back of the sanctuary, or emailed to bookoflife@uufcc.org. Trudy, would you bring up the book? This morning, Kay Azar is thankful. She's probably happy too, to have her husband home after a long 3 days in the hospital. Well, that's the only message that I have this morning. Oh, no, I have another message. I wanted to give an family update for our there's a word, our new family, or the family that we're hosting. The family experienced their first Thanksgiving. Betty Barriga shared the story of the Native Americans and Pilgrims sharing their first meal. The kids liked the pie. Lucia's name came up on the Head Start waiting list. She will need a physical, etc., and the mother needs to visit with the classroom teacher. It's all in the works. There's no transportation, which is a huge challenge. Sorengel's name came up on a waiting list for one-on-one tutoring at the library. She practices English every morning as well as throughout the day. At this point, she has two 2-hour classes on Thursday and Saturday, and a one-on-one on Wednesday, and a new day, probably Tuesday. Transportation and playtime in the park are the greatest needs at this time. Kathy picked up a second car seat and a booster seat to make it easier for volunteers. Have a great weekend. That's from Betty Barriga.
Could I add one other?
Yes, please.
This morning, you can't see it, but you're welcome to come around and look later. We have a new keyboard. Some of these keyboards, the ones made by Korg and other companies, cost $5,000 and more and on up. But don't panic. This one is a relatively inexpensive one, but it has a lot of features. And it will be a great accompanying instrument, and it does provide some organ sounds and some other sounds that we didn't have access to. We have a lovely piano, and this isn't to replace the piano. It's also to provide, because we have a number of talented pianists in our congregation, so if we want to do duo piano, it has a lovely piano sound. At some point, we may add an amplifier. You'll get to hear a little bit of it today. It'll be a little on the soft side, but you'll be able to hear it. So I'm thankful for the new instrument.
For these joys and for those sorrows and milestones that are too tender to share aloud, I would like to take a moment of silence, and that will be followed by number 349 in the gray hymnal, We Gather Together. Reverend Robert Murphy is our guest speaker today. Bob is a community minister who is active in St. Petersburg. He's the Unitarian Universalist minister who worked with congregations to start the Green Sanctuary program. He's involved in a long list of projects for economic and environmental justice in Florida. We have a special thanks to give to Reverend Bob because he is the one who suggested we apply for the Disaster Relief Fund from the UA, which we did, and received money to repair our roof. So thank you for that, especially. Bob has graduate degrees from Harvard Divinity School and from Boston University School of Public Health. Reverend Murphy?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, congregation and choir, music people of all kinds, and certainly tech assistants and all you others. I was delighted with Laura's introduction at the beginning of this service where she thanked all of you. That's enormously important in every season, but especially I think on this Thanksgiving Day weekend, just to turn to each other and just say thank you and to acknowledge each other. Today, much of what I'll say has to do with not just Thanksgiving Day, but what follows Thanksgiving Day, because it's a long weekend. So there'll be some acknowledgement of Black Friday and some other things that are also important in the discussion. We keep coming back to this theme of vision today, and visionaries, what they offer to us, not just in the present moment, but in every moment. So with all of this in mind, I invite you to turn to, this is in your gray hymnal, reading 614, and we're going to do this together, and I'll provide an introduction to 614, because I know that some of you are familiar with black elk, and some of you are not familiar with black elk, so I'll say a few words of introduction. Black elk was, we would say he was a Sioux, Ogallala, Lakota. We would probably say medicine man, but you could say prophet or holy man, whatever term you like in English that might be appropriate. Born in 1860, died in 1950, so within the lifetime of many of us, 1950. When he was 9 years old, Black Elk had a very profound vision. We don't know exactly what happened. Some of the details are a little bit vague, but he did fall into a trance as a child for several days. And when he regained consciousness, he spoke with the elders of his tribe, and he said he had had a vision, a great vision. And for the rest of his life, he tried to explain what it was he saw and what it was that he understood, and that he wanted others to understand as well. He was present for the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Yes, he was with the Indians, in case there's any doubt. He was present for the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. He was injured during that as he was trying to rescue people. Long series of adventures as a holy man. And in his later years, he went back and forth between traditional Lakota ways, Christianity, Lakota ways. He found ways to bring them together. So that's my introduction to Black Elk. Now, in this reading, I will read the first few words. We'll join together for the italics. Then I was standing on the highest mountain of all, and round beneath me was the whole hoop of the world. And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell. I understood more than I saw, for I was seeing in the sacred manner the shape of all things of the Spirit, and the shapes they must live together like one being. And I saw that the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that make one circle, wide as daylight and starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy. A vision that a 9-year-old child had somewhere in the Dakotas, and he shared it with the rest of the world for the next 80 years. He tried to explain what it was he had seen. Blessed be. You need a vision. Everybody needs a vision. Black Elk had a vision when he was a 9-year-old child. Some of you will have visions as you grow older, much older perhaps. But sooner or later you'll have a vision. You can call it a spiritual experience or existential experience. I suppose some of you might call it a midlife crisis, or you may have some other term you want to use, and I leave it up to you, whatever you like. A moment of epiphany, a moment of enlightenment, a moment of revelation. But you will have a vision. And together, all of us as members, well, you're members of one congregation, guests of the congregation, as Unitarian Universalists in a larger family, will have a collective vision. Because if we don't have the right vision in the right way at the right time, we may not be around for the next century, or our children and grandchildren may not be around. So we need a vision. A vision explains who we are, and brings us into a better understanding of what we are, what we represent, how it is we came to be. And a healthy vision teaches us, inspires us to travel in the right sort of way. You can call that a process of spiritual growth. One of our principles talks about the need for spiritual growth and just to be with each other, to be of assistance as needed. On this particular weekend, we speak about Thanksgiving, and we talk about the need for gratitude. Now, back when I was much younger, when I was 9 years old, back in the 1950s, Thanksgiving Day was very easy to understand if you were a religious liberal or any kind of religious or even non-religious person in the United States. Because each year the message came from the Great White Father in Washington at the White House. And the Great White Father told us, we're the greatest of all nations, the United States. So there was no doubt about that in the 1950s. We have everything that could be desired, and we have become the envy of the world, and we can do anything that we choose to do. And indeed, we try to do just about everything, everywhere. And a long list of nations that you can name, including places like Korea and Vietnam and some others that probably should be mentioned. Guatemala and other places. Oh, we tried. Iran, other parts of the world. We tried to do a great many things in the 1950s and in later decades because we knew that we were the greatest of nations. And every year, particularly at this time of year, Thanksgiving, we gave thanks to God because of our privileges and special place among the nations of the world. And that's the way it was when I was young. But then the understanding changed. The understanding of Thanksgiving changed, or at least it did among religious liberals, including, well, Unitarian Universalists. And we began to question Thanksgiving, not just the day, but the weekend itself, that long 4-day weekend that continues. And we started to change, we started to question for several reasons. And first of all, I'll mention because the Unitarian Universalists in the 1960s and later discovered that there were other people in the world who weren't of the Abrahamic tradition, In particular, we discovered indigenous people, among them Native Americans. We became more sensitive, more aware of their stories, their experience. As we studied the Native Americans, including the ones who had encountered the Pilgrims back in the 1620s, we became more sensitive, more aware of problems that they had experienced. So we began to talk about problems like colonialism and imperialism. We talked about problems like racism, genocide, the destruction of the environment. We began to realize that when we talked about that Pilgrim church in 1620, when we talked about those early churches in places like Boston, Salem, Concord, Cambridge, we were talking about churches that are now Unitarian Universalist churches. In a religious sense, those are our ancestors. We descended from them, and you can go visit many of those churches to this very day. You can actually go to Plymouth and you will find a Unitarian Universalist church at the top of the hill. I have preached at that church. They have Sunday services, very similar in some ways to the Sunday service here in Port Charlotte. This is part of the tradition that we come from. And because of the Native American experience and for other reasons, we're not sure we're really comfortable with that tradition anymore. And there are other problems, other difficulties that should be mentioned with the Thanksgiving Day weekend. Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. I have friends in England who sent me a message this past week asking, what is this Black Friday thing we think about? How do you explain it? What are you trying to do? You know? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. But we seem to take everything to excess on the day after our Thanksgiving Day. There's this constant celebration of commercialism and of consumerism. Go out and buy stuff, buy more and more and more stuff. Of course, the holiday season actually started several weeks ago, but it really rises up with Black Friday. And you all know why it's called Black Friday. This is the day when many businesses expect to finally make a profit, when the money will come in. It's a day of road rage. Have you ever experienced road rage seen it on Black Friday? I think most of you probably have. Many years ago, I worked at the old Jordan Marsh store in Boston. That was one of the big department stores. I was a sales clerk. They've been replaced by Macy's. Of course, Macy's has replaced a lot of things. Okay. Clerks would gossip about Black Friday because it was not popular with sales clerks at all. I remember the story about the guy who'd broken his arm bringing out a rack of dresses that were on sale for Black Friday. There were so many customers who came in so fast they turned him around and his arm was broken. And there are similar stories as well. Black Friday. Is that the vision we want? Is that what we've come to as a nation? That we have to explain to other nations? There have been protests against Black Friday, and of course there have been protests against Thanksgiving Day, but protests against Black Friday. It's a movement called Buy Nothing. All right, buy nothing. Okay. There is even a little group, and I think it's a joke, but I'm not sure, in New York City called the Church of Buy Nothing with Reverend Billy. And they meet on Friday, Black Friday, to sing their songs to discourage consumerism. Or so I've been told, but you can check that out online if you like. Reverend Billy and the Church of Buy Nothing. But there are other customs that have developed as well as a protest, I suppose, against Black Friday. I'm familiar with something called Ragamuffin Day. Ragamuffin Day. That's an old tradition around New York and some other places where people don't sell anything, they don't buy anything, but they just try to take care of each other, and the way they express it is gifts of bakery. muffins, pies, bread, things like that. Nothing bought, nothing sold, but just a time to, I suppose, express mutual aid or a sense of community. Ragamuffin Day. And there are other protests as well that have developed against this excess that comes not just with this weekend, but the holiday season that'll go all the way into January. So these are some things to keep in mind as we try to develop a new vision for how we can proceed at this time of year. Now the questions soon arise, what do we need? What's needed? And of course, we need to begin with a sense of gratitude. Laura's already expressed that for this congregation at the beginning of this Sunday service. But I keep coming back to this theme of gratitude, just to turn to each other every now and then and just say, thank you for being you. Thank you for what you contribute to the life of this congregation, into this community. Thank you for caring for others. Thank you for being on the side of justice when families, including immigrant families and others, really needed somebody to speak for justice and to act for justice. Now, the old-timers, the old Unitarians, the old Universalists would say, we live by the grace of God, and for these things we are grateful. But of course, we're modern Unitarian Universalists, and some are comfortable with God talk, and some are not. Some say maybe we should have a new discussion about what God means and what God represents, but I'll save that discussion for some other day, and maybe you'll invite me back. Who knows? Okay. Maybe I'll be too radical. Maybe I won't be radical enough. But we'll put the God talk aside for a moment. Unitarian Universalists have something called the seventh principle. So we acknowledge something that I think Black Elk had already talked about back in the 1800s. He said, we're part of an interdependent web of existence. It's not just something that's out there or over there, or, maybe up in Georgia somewhere, maybe down in Puerto Rico. We're all part of this circle of life. And there are actually many circles of life within this larger circle, an interdependent web of existence of which we're part. And maybe we can find our gratitude in the midst of that. Because of this COVID-19 experience, which I would argue has been one of the great experiences in human history, and has changed everything, economics, social life, communications, and yes, religious life. In the midst of this COVID pandemic, which continues with new variants, we need to simply say thank you to scientists, public health officials, and others who've taught us how this natural world works and provided some insights that we needed. And we also need to say thank you to the care workers, and some of them present today. Caregivers, volunteers and professionals, nurses, all kinds of people. Physicians, physician assistants. People who've looked after us, sometimes just a neighbor who did a wellness check. Members of this congregation. You can call it pastoral care or whatever term you use here, but to recognize how dependent we have been on this and will be in the future, and simply to say thank you for the caregivers. We need to say thank you in response to this recent hurricane, Ian. We can also think about Fiona and Nicole and the other storms. But it was Ian that hit this part of the coast. And again, we need to express our thanks to scientists and engineers and others who have cautioned us about climate change and sea level rise, who've tried to explain to us how it is that the natural world works and why it is that it's already been overstressed. We need to say thank you for the insights that these people provide. And we need to say thank you also to the first responders, and the second responders, and the third responders, and all the caregivers, and all the ecologists, and all the good neighbors, and all of the others, and some of them present today, for the assistance that they have provided to this congregation, and the community, and the larger world during a very difficult time. We can say thank you in all of these places, and whether you want to say thank you in traditional ways, or whether you prefer a new language, I leave that up to you. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a Unitarian in the 1800s, one of the great religious radicals, was a public speaker, went to many different places. She was a feminist, very active in the Votes for Women movement, but other things as well. And she was often asked at meals, community meals, family meals, to say grace. And these are the words that she would use to say thank you. Heavenly Mother and Father, make us thankful for all the blessings of this life, and may we be ever mindful of the patient hands that often in weariness set our tables and prepare our food. For humanity's sake. Amen. Words from one of our founding mothers, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, often identified as a Unitarian Universalist grace, which I think can be easily appreciated even in this new century. We ask for an expression of gratitude on this occasion, but there's something more that's needed. We need a vision, yes, very important, fundamental. We need some grounding, and then we need something else. We need a better way of living, of being with each other, of caring for each other. From the vision to something very down to earth and very immediate. Now, with this thought in mind, I'm going to share a story with you. This is essentially what happened after Thanksgiving Day. This goes back to Massachusetts in the 1600s. You all know the story about the Pilgrims, right? You've heard that story. There's another story, too, that I'd like to bring forward. And I even have a picture to go with the story. Now, it occurs to me that you may not see this very well if you're at home, so you're going to have to bear with me as best you can. This is a picture from one of the publications in the 1800s. And that gentleman who's seated on a rock, I think, he's wearing a pilgrim hat. You can see he's got a black cape. He's holding a Bible. That's Roger Williams. He was a very radical man who lived back in the days of the Pilgrims. And these are Native Americans, members of the Wampanoag tribe. And that's Massasoit, the chief. This is January 1636 in the wilderness of Massachusetts. And I'll tell you the rest of the story, but you can come forward later if you really want to look at this story and find out what's happening here. Because this is part of the Thanksgiving Day saga, part of the Pilgrim story that maybe you haven't heard, or maybe you haven't heard it recently. It goes like this. Roger Williams was a young radical in England in the early 1600s who decided to go to the New World, what he called the New World, Massachusetts, to join the Pilgrims. So he made the voyage in 1631. He was in Boston. He was a clergyman. He was a minister. He went down to Plymouth for a while. He was their assistant minister. He went to Salem. He was a minister in Salem there for a while. He had all kinds of radical ideas. First of all, he believed in the strict separation of church and state. He felt that they should be in different areas of influence. Both are obviously important to Williams, but you keep the two apart, okay? No heresy trials, no persecution, nothing like that. Everybody's going to be welcomed, he said. Christians, Jews, he even mentioned Muslims, which is rather interesting. We're going to have religious freedom. That's what we need here in Massachusetts. And by the way, we're going to compensate the Indians for the land that we've taken from them. So here it is, 1600s. You've heard about the doctrine of discovery, right? That's the notion that if the Europeans show up, the white people see the land, they claim it, it's theirs. William said, that's no good. We're going to reject that. Okay. We're going to do fair payments for the land that we've taken. He did some other things too. He becomes very unpopular, needless to say, with church and state authorities. They're going to push him into exile. So he runs away. He goes into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and he nearly freezes to death. He's not prepared for the wilderness experience at all. He travels about 80 miles before he gets to this place. You can see he doesn't look like he's very healthy. He's rescued by the Native Americans, much to his surprise. They find him. And Massasoit says, you're going to die if you stay out here. Why don't you come join us? Why don't you spend the winter with us? And that's what he does. Spends the rest of the winter with the Native Americans, begins to learn their language, to learn their customs. He does not convert to their religion. That's important to understand. He's very faithful to Christianity, but he begins to question Christianity. Eventually starts the colony in Rhode Island. You're familiar with that story, which becomes a refuge for all kinds of people who are fed up with the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Anne Hutchinson, Mary Dyer, William Gorton, some other names that are rather obscure these days. They're all looking for a new way of creating a religious community. Initially, many of them become Baptists. Williams tries that for about 6 weeks. The Baptists don't tell you that part of the story, by the way. He lasts about 6 weeks, a little bit longer. Then he decides he's not really comfortable with that. He's never really sure what church he wants to join. Some of his companions become Quakers, others sort of drift off in various directions. But he always keeps that respect, that appreciation for what he's learned from the Native Americans, that awareness of how he was saved by them. Yeah, I use that word salvation. And I sometimes wonder if Unitarian Universalists today follow or should follow in his footsteps, learning to appreciate both our Christian roots, ancestry, but questioning church practices, government practices, learning to discover the indigenous peoples of the world, to come into a better respect of their ways of thinking and doing things. Not so we can necessarily join their tribes, although some people have been able to do that. UUs have done that. And there are Native Americans who are Unitarian Universalists, and I have met some of them. But for most of us, that won't happen. But this possibility of a new vision, that might happen. It might even happen here. Who knows? Even in Florida, it could happen. We shall see. I have one other story, very brief comment. I was a minister in North Carolina, UU minister in North Carolina for several years. And one day we had a Hindu leader who came to visit the congregation, who spoke. He talked about spiritual experiences, and he said, you will all have spiritual experiences. If you haven't had them already, you'll have them. And one very skeptical, wise woman said, but how will I know? And our visitor said, you will know. And then she said, but how will I know? You will know. But how will I know? You will know. I leave you to ponder that. You will know. Namaste. Oh, on this practical side of things, I did want to share one thing with you. I do some work with senior citizens and others who are concerned about aging in St. Petersburg. And we have a new little publication called Maggie. And so Maggie, the first edition is over there. That's actually the Lee County edition. So there's some references to Lee County, but Charlotte is close enough. Okay, there's Maggie. Okay, so take a copy of that. It's in the silver bowl and it's outside, and it may be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Murphy. I was a history major as an undergraduate in college, so I especially enjoyed the historical part of your talk, and we can always use some humor. In our tradition, congregations exist because of the generous support of members and friends. It is our privilege and our responsibility to ensure the health and future of this fellowship. To this end, your offerings support the ministry of this fellowship, whether by pledge or donation, and may be offered online. There are several ways you can give. You can drop your donation in the baskets that are being passed around by the greeters. You can mail a check to the office. You can use the Venmo app. Payments there are identified as UUFCC offering. Whatever method you use, please note the purpose of your donation, if it is for your pledge or for a special offering, such as the second helping. If you are with us for the first time, please do not feel obliged to give. Your presence is our gift. Thank you for your offering. In the life of the community, I have several reminders, and my note, I forgot one of the items for the Book of Life. This is from Myrna Cherry. On Monday, she spent 5 hours with Lucia and Luciano, the two children of the Venezuelan mother that our fellowship is supporting in her bid for asylum. It was exhausting but wonderful. The children are zestful, cooperative, intelligent, and loving. If you want to feel good about yourself, take them to the park one day and you will be transformed. We will have our first potluck in several years today after the service. Please join us in the fellowship hall for food and beverages. The food is here. I don't know exactly the procedures, but I know we should stay masked while we're getting our food. And the porch is open on the front so that we can eat out there or in the fellowship hall. Even if you did not bring your own place setting, and especially if you did not bring food to share, please join us. There's plenty to go around. I would like to remind everyone that this week we will have new AV equipment installed in the sanctuary. Therefore, the space will not be open for meetings and activities. And we hope it all goes well so next Sunday is smooth transition. On Wednesday, the book group will meet at 1:30 to discuss the Odyssey. All are welcome to join this discussion, even if you haven't read it since you were freshmen in college. And now please rise in body or spirit and join the choir in singing number 1028 in the Teal hymnal, Fire of Commitment.
Please be seated if you wish. Okay. Blessed are the man and the woman who have grown beyond their greed and have put an end to their hatred and no longer nourish illusions. But they delight in the way things are and keep their hearts open day and night. They're like trees planted near flowing rivers, which bear fruit when they are ready. Their leaves will not fail or wither, and everything they do will succeed. Blessed be.
We will extinguish the chalice. Bill, would you assist us? The words are in the order of service. And all, please join me in our weekly litany. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May these ideals give you courage until we meet again. Final hymn, Go Lift It Up, number 1057 in the teal hymnal.